What's up, everybody? Happy Friday. Hope you're all doing well. Welcome to the studio. Charlie here. Hope you're all doing fantastic, getting ready for the weekend. Um, I know it's a little different. We're doing a Friday thing, but I just wanted to cover this whole mix prep thing one more time because I had a couple screen issues on Wednesday and wanted to make sure we got all the info out before we do some of the mix stuff next Wednesday. So first up, I just want to say thanks for everyone for joining. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already so you don't miss any of this stuff. Thank you, everybody, for all the comments, for all the interaction we've had. It's been fantastic. Loving it. Having a good time. All right, let's jump right into this. First off, as you can see, we have a Logic screen in front of me and the console behind me. Now, most of you know that I love working on the console, or at least a hybrid, if not, predominantly analog. However, there is a lot of in-the-box stuff that happens, and sometimes certain projects just are simpler to do if it stays in the box, especially if it's licensing stuff or things where I know there's going to be lots of changes or alterations down the road. We tend to do things in the box to try to keep it simpler for the future instead of having to do a bunch of recalls or going back and editing stems all the time. So in this part one, I want to talk about one thing that I think is super, super important, and that's just prepping the mix. Back when I started mixing, I'm sure there's a lot of you do the same way. You just open the session, you just start, solo the kick or solo the guitar, whatever. You start going away, you start mixing, and then as it goes along, you start adding stuff and things get really confusing. I think taking the time to kind of prep your mix, and that includes any editing that you may want to do or may need to do, just grouping your tracks together. I mean, even as simple as getting your color coding together. And I'll show you, you can already see there's a bunch of colors in the screen in front of me. Even just getting that right just makes the mixing process easier. I know I hate editing or making changes once I've started mixing. It takes you out of that creative headspace. So the first thing I do is it's color coding. And you can see here, all my drums are red. That's the lifeblood of the song. Bass is blue, guitars are green, different shades of green usually. Rhythm guitars will be kind of the bright green and the dark so I can see my left and right. And in this case we have our melody down here, and that's a little bit lighter color green there. If I'm doing vocals, I usually use orange. Keyboards or horns, I'm yellow or some variation of yellow. A lot of times strings will be some form of light blue or something like that. But I try to keep it consistent throughout my different sessions. That way, it's easy. It's not something new all the time. So every time I open a session, I can look at it and go, oh, blue, there's bass. Green, there's my guitars. I know right where everything's at. And that's the first thing I do. That even before editing, I just make sure that's there. As you can see, this track, there has been a little bit of editing done. You can see I cleaned up the toms. We left them really wide open for this, and I went ahead. I don't always cut them out this way, but in this particular track, I thought it fit better than doing some of my volume automation. I cleaned up a couple spots in between, the bass here and the guitar where it was just too noisy. I don't necessarily always clean that up. Sometimes guitar, they make noise, and sometimes it's really cool. Sometimes you want a clean break, or we know in this case, this is a track that we sent off for licensing. We knew they wanted it to be very clean on the edit. So, okay. So we clean them up to make the client happy. And that's step number one. Okay, so once you get your colors down, you get your editing done, the next step I do is I like to group everything. Let me flip back over here to my mixer. You can see right now for drums, I've got 12 tracks of drums, 2 tracks of bass, 4 tracks of rhythm guitar, 2 on each side, and then I have 4 tracks of melody and solo. So it's really 2 tracks of melody and 2 tracks of solo. We recorded all these guitars with 2 mics on them. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my drums. And one thing that you can kind of see that the volumes are set here. Now I've already mixed this song has been out, so these are volumes that I settled on as far as the relationship between the microphones, like the kick in and the kick out, snare top, snare bottom, that sort of thing. So now what I'm going to do is this half of my mixer, see right here, This is where all of these tracks over here are going to get condensed down to. And this is the same thing I would do if I was on an analog console. You know, this is just, I find In The Box is a little bit different. You know, maybe I'm grouping a few more things, but this is very similar to how I would set it up out on the Trident. So both kick mics are going to come to that channel right there. Snare top and bottom will go here. I'll group my toms here. I'll group my overheads here. I'll group my rooms here. Then there's a master drum bus, so you can see the kick through overheads all going out bus 9, which is right there. Now the rooms, I don't always send out the drum bus. A lot of the times they're going to get compressed heavily, and on the drum bus I may be doing a little more compression, a little more EQ, and then sometimes it just gets to be too much with the rooms. So usually I'm going to send those right to the stereo out. However, a lot of the times I'll still maybe, while I'm going through it, I'll take that room group and set it to go out that drum bus just to see, because sometimes it does sound cool. But I'd say 9 out of 10 times that room group that's already compressed or even getting more compressed is going to bypass my drum bus. So let's go back over here to the drums. Boom, kick in, kick out. I'm going to go right here, my buses, kick group right there. So now both of my kicks, there's the inside kick and the outside kick. Now, I'm deciding kind of on the levels I want. I can still go back and change track 1 and 2, you know, the relationship, the kick in and kick out. I could even process them individually. Now, all this was recorded on the Trident. It had compression, it had EQ. We did a lot of that stuff going in to make sure we had the sounds as close as we could to what we ultimately wanted. So they're recorded pretty well already. So most likely what's going to happen is I'm going to group those over here to the kick group, and then I'm going to do all of my next round of processing right there on that bus. Probably not going to go back over to these two channels again unless it's just to change the balance between them. So the snare, I'm going to go snare group. Now that's going to show up over here. Top, bottom, all in one nice convenient place. Toms, you see my tom group right over here. It's bus 3. Oh, wrong place. Let's go bus 3. Booms. Now the toms are coming out of there. The overheads, you see that. I'll just go ahead and set all these up real quick. Now the hi-hat and ride, well, here, we'll do that. Let's get my room mics out. And the room group is bus 5. So now all of the group stuff is there. Now the hi-hat and the ride, I almost always take those straight to my drum bus. So they're going to go right there to bus 9. So they will be coming right out of the drum bus. So now if I solo up the drum bus, I've got all my drums in one spot. I can go kick, snare, overheads, and rooms. And you can hear the rooms already compressed. Most likely, if I remember correctly, we were using the 4080s and they sound like they're getting hit through the warm audios. And that's, I think, what we ended up using on this tune. Now, the drum parallel compression, we'll get to that next Wednesday. I'll kind of show you what I like to use that for a little bit. But we'll get there. So now we have our drums group. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get our bass, which is right here. So let's take the bass bus. Now you'll notice on this bass bus right here, it says my output, bus 9. Well, what's bus 9? That happens to be my drum bus. This is something I do quite a bit, sending the bass out the drum bus. So let me tilt this down a little. a lot of the times I like how once I get a little bit of bus compression on there, I like how the bass and the drums kind of glue together when it's going out the same bus. It also tends to bring the bass forward a little, which I kind of like how it sits against the drums that way too. Now, not always. Most likely what I'll do is we'll try it. I'll solo it up. We'll do more of this next week. I'll run the bass out of just the main out, and I'll put it through the drum bus to see which way feels right. Obviously, like I said, I've already mixed this track, and that was how I had it set up for that mix. So that's where my head was then. But here's the bass. We have 2 mics on this bass. One is a Roswell Pro Audio Mini K47, and that's what we're hearing now. And this is a Yeehaw PR30. You already see a little bit of something up there. Again, we'll get to that next week. So that gets us got our rhythm section. Woohoo! Let's go to the guitars. So now the guitars, I may look at this one of 2 ways. This song's fairly straightforward. We've got, our drum tracks. We've got our bass. We have a fairly typical left-right doubled rock guitar thing going on here because this is a kind of high-energy rock song. So what I'm going to do with this is they're both going to go to the same bus right over here, which I actually called Guitar Marshall group because we were using the Marshall, but we'll just call it GT bus. And I'm going to take these both to that GT bus. They're going to go to the same spot. So now all my guitars. If my left and right sides were different, say it was maybe a poppy thing or more of like an adult contemporary rock where maybe one side was cleaner and one side was dirty, I may actually have 2 sets of guitar buses instead of 1, and I may separate my left and right and then have a master guitar bus channel kind of in the same way that I set the drums up, where I've got my separate pieces and then it goes out the drum bus right there. So it all kind of depends. In this case, like I said, it's this very standard left and right doubled rock guitar thing. So most likely, effect-wise, if I'm going to put any reverb or anything else, it's going to be both sides the same. We have different takes for our left and right. So we have good stereo width already. So I'm just going to send them to one bus. That way, I can any effects EQ. I may even use a little bit of compression for color. That stuff can, instead of having 2 or more channels where I have to load plugins on, I have 1. And that, honestly, that is one reason why a lot of this grouping happens. If you keep everything separate, let's go back over here. Let's say we stayed here working with all of these tracks, right? Which is 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 22 tracks. Not a giant session in any shape or form compared to some of the things that happen now. But if you're on your laptop and maybe you have something that actually isn't recorded that well and you have to do a lot of fixing and you're just loading plugins individually on everything. Like say your room mics, you have to put the same plugins left and the same plugins on the right side. Now, what if you had a compressor, an EQ, and maybe then another compressor to kind of cap things off, right? So now you have 3 there on the left, 3 on the right. That's 6 plugins. Depending on what you're using, you can really start bogging that CPU down. So if you group them, like in this case, the rooms, they go right here. Now if I wanted a compressor EQ further, instead of 2 channels with 6 plugins, I've got 1 channel with 3. So if that makes sense, it saves a lot of CPU energy for other things by grouping them together. Now that doesn't mean I want to load plugins and tons of plugins, because I try not to. But sometimes you're going for something, you got to do what you got to do. All right, so now we have basically our rhythm section. Let's mute these guys and let's hear our rhythm section all together. Okay, so you get the idea. Everything is now grouped down right here, right there. So we've really kind of cleaned things up. Now, one thing I should have mentioned at the top, after I've color coded, labeled, and all that, the first thing I'm going to probably do while it's all going just out the stereo is you can see through here, I have some panning going on. You can see on the guitars, I've also got panning. That is, usually I'll get everything edited, whatever, color coded together. I'll do some basic panning and basic levels. Then I'll send everything over to my aux channels over here. And then I'll go back and readjust any of these levels as necessary. That is before I EQ anything. That is before I compress anything more or do anything. I want to get it to a pretty good spot first with just levels, or organization, levels, and panning. Step number one. As you notice, there's no plugins anywhere. Well, okay, that one's there, but it's not on yet. Now, the last thing we got to do is get our guitar melody. And there's two things going on. Let's go over here. You can see right here, all these guys. That's our melodies, and the back half of the song has a guitar solo where Ernesto is shredding. Killer solo. I'll let you hear that in a second. So first off, let's go see what we have over here. We have a guitar melody bus, guitar solo bus. I separate them because I'm probably not going to treat my melody and my solo the same. They might be similar, and sometimes they do end up being the same, honestly, but especially for something like this. But I'd like to have separate controls. So what I want to do is I just want to get my two mics, and we had the same mics on the guitars. This is a Roswell Pro Audio Mini K47 and a Heil Sound PR30. And the melody, I am just, oh, that's the solo actually. Let's get the melody. And it's bus 11. And the solo, I think I'm right. Yes. And the solo is bus 15. So now, let's hear our melody. And let's go over here to our solo. Oh, get the solo. I'll play it in a second. He's killing it on this track. So everything now we've got right here. Oops. And that's Sir Ernesto Homeyer shredded up on the guitar. And that's my first step right there. Usually, everybody's setups are a little bit different. I think there's, from watching some of my favorite guys, this is fairly similar to a lot of what some of the big guys are doing. And I highly recommend taking the time to figure out some system that works for you. And this, I'm using Logic. I prefer Logic. I've got Pro Tools as well. But it doesn't really matter what DAW you're working in. You could Cubase, Nuendo, Logic, Pro Tools, whatever. I'm sure you can do it in the Personas one. All that stuff will work. It's just really just a routing setup. That's all this is. And to make things simpler. Because now that I'm over here, it's easy for, instead of going like the solo I want to send to a delay, instead of going to both of these channels or picking which one, I set my level, which you can see on the solo. I've got both mics even. And then it goes over here. And then whatever processing, if there's EQ, if there's something else I do, it happens. And then I can send that sound out to my delays or reverbs or whatever I'm doing. And the same with the kick. I have both mics coming here. Maybe I'm going to send that to the parallel compression instead of going over here and having to send both tracks or figure out which one I like. I just send whatever my kick sound's going to be over to that. It simplifies a lot of things. It keeps the session a little bit cleaner. I'm not a huge template guy, really, per se, when I'm doing this. I know some people are really huge on templates, and it can save you a ton of time if you're mixing similar things, or at least if you have part of your setup. This is probably as close to a template as I get right here. And almost every time I set it up by hand anyway, because it takes 5 minutes. It doesn't take a long time. And then I can assess the session that way too. But if setting up and making a template for you is great, and maybe I'll throw this one out for download too. But if setting up a template that you can at least start with helps you, then set one up, man. Figure it out. It'll probably be some trial and error, and if it's like me and probably everybody else, it's going to evolve a little bit over time. Things change, especially if you start putting plugins and stuff in your chain. If you're an all in the box mixer or mixer and recorder, then you're probably going to have certain plugins that you go to all the time. I like to forget between things, so I don't get too stuck in certain ways of doing it. Same with analog. But if it helps you, by all means, do it. But I think the big thing really is just getting prepped, making sure the session is ready to go. Because now when I start mixing, most of my editing work and routing work is all done. So any extra routing I may do now is going to be for an effect or a compressor, an EQ, or something that's going to help the music out so I can stay in a creative headspace. Because I absolutely hate having to do editing and non-creative stuff in the middle of the mix process. That's just me, but man, I want to get in a headspace and I want to rock with it. I also am not one of those trying to hurry through my mix. A mix takes as long as a mix takes. If it's 3 hours, it takes 3 hours. If it's 9 hours, it takes 9 hours. If it's 4 days, it takes 4 days. It just, you do it right. So that's it. Sending the bass to the drum group is, yeah. I think, I want to say I was watching some Michael Brower, because he is one of my favorites. And I think that's where I got that from, actually. There was some video I was watching his, and he was grouping them again. I'm like, oh, I got to try that. And it's actually really, really cool trick. Actually, Brower's got a lot of cool tricks, actually. So anyway, let's have a little quick listen to a couple of these parts, just so you can know this tune pre-mixing. So here, you know what? I'll take the second A section, kind of through the solo here. You get an idea. Or here, we'll take it from the re-intro. So this is everything in. Again, it's organized, it's grouped, it's panned, and some basic levels. No EQ, other than what we did tracking. No extra compression, no effects whatsoever. All right, so you get the idea. That's that. All right, next Wednesday, we're going to do part 2 of this, and I'm going to go over some of the mixing stuff that I did. Now, I partially did a bit of a hybrid thing when I did the actual mix. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it in with all stock plugins. That way it's just, we're even across the board, not going to use anything fancy, and just show you some of the things that I would do if I was in the box mixing, a few different ideas and thoughts, just some of the concepts that I do. Maybe, hopefully some of those will help you guys. So you guys have a great weekend. Thanks for joining me. Happy recording.